This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for January 1st through the 7th. On this week's show, Jim and the Weavers get banned. We talk about the significance of January 1st, why this week is important in the life of Sam Phillips, and the Sid Vicious trial begins. This show goes more in depth about some of the events that we put on our daily podcast, the Music History Today podcast, which drops every single day, including weekends, wherever you get your podcast from. Now, on to this week's episode. Jimi Hendrix was never really one to play by the rules, which is what made him the greatest guitarist to ever live, in my opinion. It was his experimenting with blues, feedback, and other things that made musicians always want to copy him. And this particular event is a really good example of the copying part. Back on January 4th, 1969, the Jimi Hendrix Experience was scheduled to appear on singers Lulu's variety TV show Happening for Lulu on the BBC television network in England. Lulu was a big pop star at the time. The band was supposed to play the song Voodoo Child, and then for their second song they were supposed to play the song Hey Joe, and move that song into Lulu's big hit To Sir With Love while Lulu came up on stage to sing with them. Now, two things influence what happened next. The first was that the band had smoked way too much pot backstage before the performance. The second was that the band Cream was rumored to have broken up just before that performance. Jimmy went on stage and the band went through Voodoo Child without any problems. And then the band started playing their first big hit, Hey Joe, which was not exactly one of Hendrix's favorite songs. They played for a little bit, and then Hendrix stopped playing it and decided to play Cream's song, Sunshine of Your Love, in instrumental form for so long that Lulu never got up on stage to sing To Sir With Love. The group was banned from the BBC from that day forward. While Hendrix was the first to mess with establishment television and radio, he was definitely not the last. The Doors messed with Ed Sullivan by singing the censored line, Girl, We Couldn't Get Much Higher, while performing their song Light My Fire on the Ed Sullivan TV show, for which, as a benefit, they got banned. Elvis Costello and his group The Attractions pulled a Hendrix on Saturday Night Live when Elvis stopped playing the song Less Than Zero and instead started playing Radio Radio. That little act of defiance got him and the band a 12-year ban from that show. They could have cared less, as Elvis did it as a publicity stunt because the Attractions were just starting out in America, but they weren't getting much traction as a live act. The publicity stunt / Hendrix tribute changed all of that in a heartbeat. Nirvana, of course, being Nirvana, had to give the idea their own little spin. During the 1992 MTV Video Music Awards, MTV wanted the band to play the song Lithium. The band wanted to play their song Rape Me, which was actually banned at the time because, well, the title of the song was Rape Me. The band went out on stage, played a few chords of Rape Me, and then stopped and played Lithium like MTV wanted. And then, as the song was ending, Chris Novoselic threw his bass guitar up into the air, but missed catching it on the way down, causing it to hit him in the head, thus proving that karma sometimes is immediate. The things we do for our craft. Jimi Hendrix sticking it to the man by doing a TV performance his way and getting banned for it in the process. January 4th, 1969. Next, let's talk about loyalty for a minute. It's a word that can have both good and bad connotations. In relationships and friendships, loyalty can actually be looked at as a good thing. Of course, loyalty shouldn't mean being a yes man and completely agreeing with someone. You should still be able to keep it real with your friend or loved one and tell them the truth every now and then. Loyalty can also be a bad thing, especially when it comes to politics. Loyalty can be used as a weapon, for example, in order to test your allegiance to either a country or, in this particular day and age, a politician. Ask former FBI Director James Comey or any number of former members of a former presidential administration about the price of not giving blind loyalty to someone. You could also ask the same thing to the members of the folk group the Weavers. Back in the late 1940s, Pete Seeger, Fred Hellerman, Ronnie Gilbert, and Lee Hayes founded the folk rock group the Weavers. By the turn of the decade, the Weavers were enjoying a lot of success with songs like Goodnight Irene and On Top of Old Smoky. The group started a folk revival that led to other acts eventually being influenced by them, among them being Bob Dylan and also Peter, Paul, and Mary. The problem for the Weavers began in the 1930s when they were involved with causes that the United States Communist Party were involved in, chiefly among them civil rights, labor rights, and pacifism. By the late 1940s into the early 1950s, the anti-communism witch hunt in America was in full swing, and because of the group's past activities before they became a group, the Weavers collectively became enemies of the state. The FBI put them under surveillance, they were dragged in front of Congress, they lost their recording contract, they couldn't book shows, and definitely couldn't show up on any television or radio shows. It was a complete, utter blacklisting of their careers, which eventually led to them calling it quits. By the late 1950s into the early 1960s, though, things began to look up again. The communist witch hunt had died down after journalist Edward R. Murrow helped to take down the chief politician and opportunist who orchestrated the witch hunt, Joseph McCarthy. The Weavers even got back together and started to get their careers back. They were even scheduled to go on the NBC Tonight Show on January 2nd, 1962. The Tonight Show was a big show, especially back then. It was enjoying popularity under its second host, Jack Paar, who had taken over for the original TV show host, Steve Allen, back in 1957. Someone at NBC, however, got a little antsy about having the Weavers on. Even though the Red Scare had subsided and John F. Kennedy was president, NBC didn't want to have any backlash from having the Weavers on. So, before the show, NBC officials came to the Weavers with an ultimatum. They would allow the group to perform on the show, but only if they signed a document disavowing the Communist Party. This was the Weavers' big chance to get their careers going back in the right direction again, and all they had to do was sign this statement. They all looked at the statement, and then every one of the group members said that they wouldn't sign it. And that was it. NBC canceled their performance. What is ironic is that host Jack Paar himself would walk off the Tonight Show set just over a month later after one of his segments had been censored. He would return to the show less than a month after that, but by the end of the year, the show had a new host, Johnny Carson, who held hosting duties into the early 1990s. As for the Weavers, they wouldn't get to go on national television again until 1968, when another radical TV show that also ran into a lot of political controversy appeared on the scene, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour Show, starring the anti-war singing comedy duo of Tom and Dick Smothers. That particular show would also be canceled after one season due to their anti-war stance, even though the show was a ratings hit. As for the Weavers, all of the original members have since passed on, the latest being Fred Hellerman back in 2016. The price of loyalty with the cancellation of the appearance of the Weavers on the NBC Tonight Show with Jack Paar on January 2nd, 1962. Before we go any further, we'd like to tell you about our other podcasts. The Music History Today podcast goes over the daily events in music history and drops daily, including weekends, on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. There's also the Music Halls of Fame podcast, which talks about a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, along with other Music Halls of Fame's museums and walks of fame. The Music Halls of Fame podcast drops every Thursday and can also be found on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to this podcast. The first week of January was important to Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Sam Phillips for a couple of reasons. First, it was when he was born, specifically January 5th, 1923 in Florence, Alabama. Sam started working at a radio station in Muscle Shoals, Alabama as an announcer and engineer during the Great Depression in order to help his family pay the bills. When Sam was growing up, his family had a farm, and it was during that time that Sam fell in love with R&B, the blues, and gospel as the farm workers sang those songs out in the fields. At the radio station where he first worked, they played those songs along with the usual standards of the day, which gave Sam the idea to help springboard those types of music once he changed radio stations and moved up to Memphis, Tennessee back in 1945. On January 2nd, 1950, Sam opened the Memphis Recording Service studio, where he let guys like B.B. King, Howlin' Wolf, Ike Turner, Bobby Blue Bland, and Junior Parker record their music. In 1952, he renamed the studio Sun Record Company, which also became his own record label. The way things worked back in the day was this. Musicians would come in and record the songs, and then Sam would sell the songs to the bigger record labels. It was a pretty decent living. But during this time, Sam realized something. He wanted R&B and the blues to be loved by everybody, regardless of race, but he knew that in order to get the music into the mainstream, he would need to find artists with an image to sell it. On January 8, 1953, Elvis Presley walked into Sun Records in order to record a couple of songs for his mother, as it was also Elvis's birthday that day. Sam wasn't in the studio that particular day, but another person who was there, radio personality Marian Keisker, was in the studio, and based on what Marian heard, talked Sam into listening to Elvis sing. Sam invited Elvis to come back and record. Together they found a few guys to play with, and one night they were fooling around and playing a blues song called That's All Right. They decided to record the song and give it to a local DJ who played the song 3 days later. The radio station's switchboard lit up, wondering who the singer was. And that was only the beginning. Another artist who joined that record label was Roy Orbison. Roy was born in Texas in 1936. When he was 6 years old, he was given a guitar. And Roy started playing in a band called the Wink Westerners, who played country songs and also had their own local radio show. When he finished high school, Roy went to North Texas State College. His idea at the time was to study geology so that he could work on the oil fields if music didn't actually work out. Once he heard that fellow North Texas State College student Pat Boone had gotten a record contract, Roy resolved to do the exact same thing. Roy ended up transferring to Odessa Junior College, and while there, he and what remained of the Wink Westerners played dances on the weekends and had a local TV show. One day, Johnny Cash stopped by to perform on that television show. He suggested that the group audition for Sam Phillips at Sun Records. Sam, however, turned them down flat. Around this time, Roy and his band got a better TV gig with a much bigger station. They changed the name of the band to the Teen Kings, and since Sun Records didn't take them, the group decided to record a song that Roy had written a few years earlier while at North Texas State College called Ooby Dooby. And once they released it on Jewel Records, the song actually did pretty well. It also got noticed by Sam Phillips, who only months earlier had turned the group down for a recording contract. This time, however, based on the success, Sam, of course, said yes. The Teen Kings re-recorded Ooby Dooby for Sun Records, and the song went to number 59 on the Billboard Singles Chart. The group ended up splitting up, but Roy decided to stay at Sun Records for a time. Two other artists who made their names recording for Sam were Johnny Cash and Jerry Lee Lewis, and those four recording artists made up what would be coined the $1 Million Quartet, and all would go on to have amazing careers, helping to establish the foundation for what would be called rock and roll. Sam would famously sell Elvis's contract to RCA Records for $35,000, and as the years went on, Sam lost interest in the recording studio. Eventually, it was taken over by his sons, but don't feel too bad for Sam. See, Sam took that $35,000 that he got from selling Elvis's contract and invested it in a local hotel chain that was just starting up. That fledgling little hotel chain, by the way, that was Holiday Inn. You may have heard of it. They've got a couple thousand hotels at this point. That investment turned Sam into a multi-millionaire. Not bad for a kid from the Great Depression. Sam's been inducted into a few halls of fame, including the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Blues Hall of Fame, along with the Country Music Hall of Fame. The birth of Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee Sam Phillips, January 5th, 1923. Sam Phillips opening what became the legendary Sun Studios, January 2nd, 1950. If there was ever anyone who was the poster boy for punk rock, it was definitely Sid Vicious. The man had anti-establishment written all over him with swagger to match. He became the bassist of the Sex Pistols because the group had just fired their original bassist, and Vicious happened to be at every single one of the Sex Pistols shows, so he was pretty familiar to the guys. Sid, however, had a couple of problems. The first was that in the beginning, he couldn't play bass. In fact, for some gigs, the band unplugged his bass from the sound system. The second and more important problem was that he also was a serious drug addict. By the time he joined the group, he was already using multiple drugs, and it didn't help that his mother, Ann Beverly, was also a drug addict and even gave him some drugs. And because of his use, he was hospitalized for a time for treatment of hepatitis. This meant that he missed a lot of time during the recording of the only Sex Pistols album, Nevermind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols, so Steve Jones had to do both bass and electric guitar on the vast majority of the album. Sid's drug use actually got in the way of the group a lot. Sid went after audience members routinely, and the band broke up 2 weeks into their U.S. tour back in 1978. It was around this time that Sid met and started a very volatile relationship with a party girl and heroin user Nancy Spungen. Their flames burned bright and really fast for each other. Maybe a little too fast. They would constantly get into fights mainly brought on by drug rage, and it was during one of the drug rages that the unfortunate happened. On October 12, 1978, Sid woke up to find Nancy dead on the floor at the Hotel Chelsea in New York City. She bled to death from a stab wound in the stomach. Sid was arrested and charged with murder. According to police, during the police interrogation, Sid changed his story a few times before confessing to the murder. Bail was set at $50,000 US, the conditions being that he not leave New York City and that he also check in with the police every day and seek treatment for drug addiction at a methadone clinic. During this time, Sid tried to commit suicide twice, once by cutting his wrists with a broken light bulb, which got him a visit to Bellevue Hospital's psych ward, and while there, he tried to commit suicide again by jumping from a window. All the while, his lawyer tried to keep him out of jail. That changed when Sid went to a club and got into a fight with singer Patti Smith's brother Todd Smith after Sid hit on Todd's girlfriend, and Todd's girlfriend rejected the hit, so of course Sid got angry. Sid was arrested for assault, and bail was set again, but this time only for $10,000 for some reason. And the bond was actually covered by his old record label, Virgin Records. The rumor was at the time that Mick Jagger quietly paid for Sid's lawyer during all this time, but actually it was Virgin Records who was covering all legal expenses, not Mick Jagger. Sid was released from jail again on $10,000 bond on January 18, 1979, even though his trial had officially started on January 2nd, 1979. Sid stayed in jail for a couple more weeks to complete his drug detox program. On February 1st, 1979, Sid was released from jail. Sid celebrated his release and being clean from heroin the only way he knew how. He had his friend Peter Gravel get him heroin and then went to his friend Michelle Robison's apartment on 63 Bank Street in Manhattan, where they were having a little get-together. Sid's mother, Ann, was also there. That evening at the party, while talking about the future and making plans in the event of his acquittal, Sid Vicious took the heroin. He overdosed that night and passed away in his sleep. He was found dead the next morning by both his mother and by Robison. His ashes, by the way, are scattered over Nancy's grave. Sid's drug-addicted mother, Ann, ended up passing away from her own drug overdose in 1996. As, of course, with everything in life these days, there's conspiracy theories, both concerning Nancy's death and also Sid's overdose, including one concerning robbers who supposedly broke into the couple's hotel room trying to steal money that Nancy had and turned it into a robbery gone wrong, along with one about Sid's mother purposely injecting him with heroin in order to kill him. Surprisingly, Oliver Stone has yet to make a conspiracy movie about either Sid or Nancy yet. Go figure. Missing an opportunity there, Oliver. Since the punk rock era, the Sex Pistols have become, along with the Clash, the symbols of punk rock, and Sid has become its patron saint. What's ironic is that Sid's image is on every t-shirt, poster, and any other thing that can be bought or sold. Pretty sure that Sid would stick up his middle finger on that one. The trial against Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols for the murder of his girlfriend Nancy Spungen started on January 2nd, 1979. Finally, January 1st, New Year's Day, can be a good day to look back on your life and start fresh. Maybe make a resolution to make a better way for yourself. Case in point. On January 1st, 1960, Johnny Cash was performing his first prison concert. In the audience, and also doing time for petty armed robbery, was a young kid by the name of Merle Haggard. Merle was so taken with Johnny and his guitar playing that when he was released from prison, he learned how to play the guitar and start his own legendary country music career. Sometimes January 1st can bring either joy or just a whole bunch of stupidity, depending on how you look at it. For example, on January 1st, 2006, Flava Flav's TV reality show Flavor of Love premiered, and either the innate joy or, more than likely, the stupidity kind of followed that one. Then, January 1st can be a good time to reunite with someone you love, or love to hate. These next guys would reunite quite a few times, but the first time would be on New Year's Day, and it would be because of a particular song. Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, or Simon and Garfunkel if you will, were one of the biggest selling musical duos of all time. They, along with the Mamas and the Papas, were symbols of the 1960s counterculture movement. They originally met in Queens, New York, and started off as Tom and Jerry. They changed their names to their last names, finally. They also changed their music from pop to folk music. Their first album did badly, so they broke up. Breaking up would be a running theme throughout their careers, actually. You get used to it. What brought them back together the first time was that someone took one of the songs from their first album and mixed it with electric guitar. That remix song, The Sounds of Silence, took off 2 years after its original release. When The Sounds of Silence hit number 1, Simon and Garfunkel decided on January 1st, 1966 to reunite, make a go of their partnership again, and record a new album together. And what followed was a string of now familiar hits, including Mrs. Robinson, Cecilia, and The Boxer. In 1970, just before yet another breakup, the duo released what became their biggest-selling album, Bridge Over Troubled Water. The title song was written by Paul Simon and employs the Phil Spector patented wall of sound production technique of overloading the instruments on the recording. The song was the last one recorded, but the first one completely finished for the album. It was supposed to be sung by the both of them, but it was decided that singing duties should go to Garfunkel. The song was released in January 1970 and became a big hit. It sold over 6 million copies worldwide. It also won 5 Grammy Awards, including Record and Song of the Year. The duo, over the past 50 years, have had reunions that were busted even before they got going. The guys managed to record a song together in the 1970s that did pretty well called My Little Town. In the 1980s, Paul asked Art to contribute to Paul's album Hearts and Bones. Paul ended up not using any of the bits on the album, which led to yet another falling out because, feelings got hurt. The duo also had a memorable concert in Central Park in 1981 and a brief concert tour or two. Paul, of course, went on to have a pretty successful solo career. One of Art's cousins, incidentally, was Lou Pearlman, who would become famous as the manager of the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, and then would end up in jail himself, where he would pass away from financial misdoings, to put it mildly. Considering that the duo were together for not really all that long, they put out some amazing music. They were one of the icons of the counterculture movement. All 5 of their studio albums went platinum, with Bridge Over Troubled Water selling over 8 million copies on its own, let alone the single itself. When Simon and Garfunkel reunited the first time, the first of many, many times, it was on New Year's Day, January 1st, 1966. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for January 1st through the 7th. Thanks for listening.